Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creep Smith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Welcome back, wildlings. Tonight we have an archive of absurdity called My Mother's Notebook by KabukiKitsune. Years ago, after the death of my mother, I found myself saddled with the unenviable task of finally sorting through her possessions. Most of them would no doubt end up trashed. My mother had been something of a pack rat, you see. I suppose you could call her a hoarder, though she wasn't as bad as many you see on television. Mom collected books, old books. Many of them ended up being valuable, and such were sold to help pay for her funeral. In the end, it took me some 3 months to go through everything. By the time it was all over, I'd gotten sick of digging through things. Between the dust and the occasional spider that was none too happy with me disturbing its home, I'd become numbed to what I might find. To be honest, you might be surprised just what you can turn up in a load of old books. More so when you're dealing with a person not entirely in their right mind as they're collecting them. Everything from ancient encyclopedia sets to cookbooks with numerous scribbles in the margins to sex help manuals from the 1800s. I even turned up a handful of old grocery lists where, no doubt, much to his chagrin, my father had failed to pick up the milk. This left me to wonder just why my mom had kept those things. But then again, like I said, she wasn't really all there. It was in the bottom of the last box that I came across the notebook. It was your typical old-school wire-bound notebook. Nothing too special now that I think about it, yet as far back as I could remember, my mom always seemed to have that notebook with her. She wrote in it from time to time, though I had never bothered to try and read it. I was, if anything, an honest kid, and I'd always figured that it was her personal diary. As I sat there looking at the book one last time, I found my curiosity growing. I needed to know what was there in that book. Maybe it would give me some insight into why my mom always acted the way she did. At the very least, I'd solve one mystery from my childhood. Opening it to its first page, I saw a simple script that read, "This is the life of," with my name filled in. Each page had some milestone in my life, dated from the day I was born. I read about my humorous birth, with details about how my first act upon reaching this world was to urinate on the doctor. The next few entries detailed more mundane, if gross, things like my first solid bowel movement, my first bite of solid food, my first word. Mom had never told me that my first word was "damn it." And according to the log, it seemed that this had come about after one of my favorite toys had gone missing. This brought something of a chuckle to me, as I didn't remember that particular incident, but I could picture my father's face upon hearing it. Each page I turned, the log continued on. It swiftly moved into kindergarten, noting in one log how I was already reading books above my age group and making note of a few accidents that I suffered for want of a small bladder. I didn't recall my mother being there for any of those incidents, but then again, I really didn't have much memory that far back to begin with, so I assumed that the teacher had told her. First grade was much like kindergarten, and each subsequent grade became the same. Fifth was the hardest for me to read. It detailed the problems I had with my teacher, going into detail about the paddlings that I'd suffered at this evil woman's hands and the rather extensive lengths that I'd gone in order to hide that from my mother. Yet it seemed that she had known all along. I wondered then why she had never said anything, and yet something told me that it was probably best that she hadn't, at least not then. Things started to move pretty quickly from that point. 6th grade passed with only a few notes on it, with 7th being the same. My first 8th grade year was a disaster, taking up no less than 6 pages with numerous accounts detailing the problems that would lead up to me repeating the grade. The second time through 8th grade only had 2 minor notes on it, and my high school years covered only 2 pages altogether. That's where things started to turn weird. I would have expected that to have been the end of the journal, and yet it wasn't. There before me were each subsequent year. I flipped through a few, my eyes dancing over the records. On one I saw an account of when I lost my virginity. On another, the day I broke up with my longtime girlfriend. Still another noted that that girlfriend had gotten pregnant and, at my urging, had had an abortion. The details in the logs were starting to scare me, not just because I had told no one about these things, but because my mother wasn't anywhere near me when they had happened. I'd moved out of state to go to college and kind of lost touch with my family. I mean, sure, my girlfriend could have told them, but I didn't see that happening. Mel really didn't... Well, I suppose the best way to put it is she didn't like my mother, and vice versa. They'd only met once, and it had gone quite badly, so the issue was never pressed further. After the entries on my college years, I found myself flipping through and finding entries right up to this year. That's when I started to get afraid. As if the previous revelations weren't bad enough, the fact was, my mother died in 2010, yet here I was reading entries from 5 years after her death. And these were things she had written about well prior to that date. Things she had no way of knowing about, such as my stint being homeless and my moving across the country to take a new job. The growing love between myself and a girl that I'd only met through online contact, well, that was an ever-present log in the notebook. Yet that had all happened long after my mother was dead and gone. This brings me to the last entry. The date on it is August 10th, 2015. It was my mom's final entry, with all the pages after that being blank. Of all the entries, even the mysterious ones, this is the one that haunts me the most. It's also a date that I doubt I'll ever forget. You see, on that day, while walking to work, I was nearly run down in a crosswalk by a distracted driver. The guy hadn't noticed the light changing, and it was dark out, so it was no surprise that when he finally looked up from his cell phone, he was rather shocked to see someone mere feet from the front bumper of his car. That car very nearly hit me, missed me by inches as I jumped forward. I can still feel the tug on my back from where his mirror struck my backpack. I can even see the look of horror on his face. The entry details all of that, and yet it differs in one very pressing way. On August 10th, 2015, I narrowly escaped death. This entry says otherwise. So stay scary, wildlings, and make the most of your nights.